Conversations with Yogis. Today we have a special guest because we invited someone who's actually not a yoga teacher, but we thought Ashley and I have been talking about how little we know about our cycles. So we have thought, why not get an expert on the podcast to talk about it? Because during the recording of season 1, we have noticed how our practice changes throughout the months and throughout the days and how we are affected by it and how little we know about these cycles, which is crazy to think because we've been living in this body for so long and in our bodies. And I'm like, how come we know so little about it? So that's why we asked Katy to come on the podcast, who's going to tell us all about it. But I think the best way to start is, can you introduce yourself, Katy? And thank you very much for coming into the podcast.
Yes, thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be invited. So I am Katy Ewan, also known as Reflex East on Instagram. So I am a fertility awareness mentor and a reproductive reflexologist. So I'm helping people with their menstrual cycles to understand what is going on, helping them deal with symptoms, often supporting people through trying to conceive, and on the flip side of that, teaching people how to use their menstrual cycle as a method of birth control, which you can effectively do. So I get really excited about this work. I properly geek out on it all the time, constantly studying something and learning more about it, because there's just always so much to learn with this stuff, and then how to apply it to your life. And then once you see it, you can't unsee it, and then you're like, whoa, okay, this is why I feel different at different times, and the expectation of your body, and understanding that it is going to be different at different times of your cycle, how you feel in your body, what your body what feels easy, what might feel harder, and that's just your hormones doing what they should be doing. So just learning this stuff it gets really exciting.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing, and I think we can dive deep straight into it. So what are our cycles consist of? Can you tell us more about it?
Yes. So we as women have menstrual cycles. So our menstrual cycle starts with our period. So this is a process of our reproductive hormones going through this cyclical nature. Your body is effectively doing this in order to try and conceive, whether you want a baby or not, but this is a process that's happening. So what we start with menstruation, so your period, that is day 1 of your menstrual cycle. And whilst we're always talking about periods and what's going on there, maybe we struggle with pain or symptoms among there, that gets so much kind of airtime, whereas the real kind of star of the menstrual cycle really is ovulation. We wouldn't have a period without ovulation. So ovulation is the process of an egg being released. And then we move into the second half of the cycle, where it's kind of all about chilling out and kind of nesting. So the hormone that dominates that second half of the cycle is called progesterone. So it's our progestation hormone. So it's going to help to maintain early pregnancy. But even if you don't want to get pregnant, that second half of the cycle is really important to be supported to manage PMS symptoms and other things that you may be experiencing in your menstrual cycle. So, I mean, that's a very brief overview. I feel like I skipped over a lot of stuff there. But if we're splitting the cycle into 2 phases, we have the follicular phase and the luteal phase. So they're probably names that people may have heard kind of floating around, and you're like, what does that mean? So follicular, let's think of follicular being the first part of the menstrual cycle. I always think follicular first. It's just a nice little bit of alliteration to help you remember. So that is from menstruation. We then have the impact of estrogen kicking in. So again, one of those hormones that we always hear a lot about. That's going to help to build that endometrial lining, so the lining of your womb. Once estrogen gets to a certain level, another hormone kicks in, and that's what triggers ovulations. That's luteinizing hormone. And then ovulation happens, and then we move into the luteal phase of the cycle, and that's that second half of the cycle. So from a kind of if we're thinking energetic perspective, the follicular phase is quite often seen as a much more kind of blossoming time, really full of energy, whereas the luteal phase is a much more kind of grounded time, if we're thinking about it from that perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, now I'm like, oh, that sounds so simple. But if someone would ask me to try to say all this, I'm like, I actually don't know. I get probably as far as menstruation and ovulation, and then I'm like, done. But no, it's very clear.
There's lots of different frameworks that we can look at the cycle through. And one of the kind of really popular frameworks is one that I really like to use. I think it's just a really easy like analogy to get your head around of associating different phases of your cycle with the seasons that we have in our like year. So winter being when you're bleeding, and it's a really nice way to think of kind of like the qualities of these parts of the cycles as well. So like winter bleeding, thinking of kind of hibernating a bit, wanting to like take time to rest, to be quite introspective. Then we move into that kind of later part of the follicular phase where it's like springtime, think of things full of potential, like the energy's starting to rise, estrogen's starting to rise. Then we get to summer, so that being ovulation, that kind of like real peak point of the cycle. Lots of people around ovulation find that that's when they're feeling their best. You want to be much more outward. Like estrogen literally makes you want to be more out in the world. It's the hormone that's kind of making you want to find a mate, essentially. So whether that's what you're actively doing or not, like it's easier often to be out in the world around ovulation, as it often is around the summertime when it's just like, yeah, let's just go out, like rather than a day like today where you're like, I'm going to stay inside because it's raining and grey. Then the luteal phase, so that post-ovulation time being like autumn, again, a time to kind of like come in, reflect, see what's going on, take a bit more time to kind of rest and wind down ahead of that bleed, that winter time. So that's a really nice framework that a lot of people use.
Yeah, that makes sense. And because I guess also like if you can start to track your cycle, because everyone has different lengths of cycles, start to track your cycles, then if you plan some big events, you can try to even track around it if you're very organized.
Yeah, exactly. Like I use Google Calendar and I'll sort of like block out different parts of my calendar with like different colors to be like, okay, that's when I'm bleeding, that's springtime. And like it just makes it a really nice way to like have a quick visual on like where you are in your cycle and what's going on. So like I am right in the middle of my summertime, so like ideal time for recording a podcast.
Yeah, that's good.
That's very cool. Like because I know as a female, you go through these waves and sometimes you don't really connect them to your cycle. You're just, you get really energetic and creative, and then you get into your low part. And when you get into your low part, sometimes you have to remind yourself that, that's not permanent. You just have to let yourself be there and ground and maybe connect that back to your cycle and be like, okay, I'm going through this part of my cycle. It's okay to do less. It's okay to rest. And just to, nourish yourself instead of feeling like you always have to be creatively working or giving or being productive. Like I know I can be really hard on myself for that. I'm like, why can't I get anything done today? My mind is just not working. And then like last week it was fine. Like I was so creative. And then I've been studying nutrition and how the hormones work with your cycle and exactly what you're talking about, like how it affects you emotionally and energetically is so interesting to sit back and think like, okay, I'm going to use my ovulation phase to be like, get all this creativity out into the world. And yeah.
100%. It's quite relieving, I think, for a lot of people to be like, oh, okay, like whilst the expectation like societally has often been like output, like doing, like productivity, it's like our kind of nature isn't like that. And if you kind of honor that, then you can make the most out of all the different parts of your cycle. Like often in that luteal or like autumn phase, it's kind of a real like, let's get it done. Like let's crack on. Time to kind of get rid of all the fluff and get into like the nitty gritty. And when we kind of sync with our cycles, you find the days that you're like, oh, okay, like I've got lots of energy, like you'll be able to get way more done than if you're kind of forcing yourself every day of your cycle to get that stuff done. It's like that kind of honoring what your body's telling you, and like we need to rest. Like we don't need to earn rest. It's a real necessity.
Yeah. And I also think about like, we're more in a patriarchal society, and testosterone is quite a go out and get everything done hormone. So when women compare themselves to that, it's not possible for females to do that through the whole month.
Yeah, I think like you say, like a whole society is built, like the male hormones do have a cyclical nature, but it's like a 24-hour kind of cycle, where we have this more monthly-ish cycle, and it's just not our kind of nature. I mean, and that's not to say in theory you can do anything at different points of your cycle. It's just, it may, like, you may have more of a leaning towards doing certain activities or feeling a certain way, and if you can kind of lean into those leanings, then you're just going to get more out of it, really, and hopefully feel not so exhausted along the way.
Yeah. What do you think about how that affects someone with PCOS, or that doesn't have a cycle, like where they have the bleed and ovulation, I think it's called?
Yeah, so anovulatory cycles, where there's like not ovulation, or hypothalamic amenorrhea, where someone's not had a period for like 6 months or more, what we're seeing there is, or in PCOS, for instance, either a lack of or like delayed ovulation. So what's happening from like a real like biological perspective, we have our ovaries, and there's hormones that stimulate the ovaries in order to create the eggs, and it's our eggs that release estrogen. So that process is kind of, it's taken its time, it's not quite getting there. In cases where it's like anovulation or hypothalamic amenorrhea, it's sometimes a case of, again, societally women are often told to like eat less, move more, and from a hormonal perspective, that just wreaks absolute havoc. So we want to make sure that we are well fed and nourished, and that has a really huge impact on the menstrual cycle, and that can help to, I mean, that's a really simplified way of putting it, but like help to bring back ovulation. Whereas something like PCOS, sometimes there's like the insulin resistance going on, and then that can have an impact on follicular function and what's going on there. But there are so many things we can do to support the menstrual cycle, nutrition being a huge one, lifestyle, like stress management is a really big one, kind of like that nervous system regulation. Like if your nervous system is just feeling fried, for want of a better word, your reproductive system is going to be like, whoa, we are not ready to be getting pregnant at this point in time. Like whether you want that or not, that's how your body is kind of viewing it. So if your body is perceiving threat or stress, your reproductive system is going to be like, we're holding back, like we are not going to be doing the ovulation, whether that's out of your body's perceiving there's not the resources, or like it's just not like a good time for you to be kind of conceiving.
Yeah, like a protective mechanism.
Yeah, kind of. Like it's a real because your body, I was literally talking to a client about this yesterday, your body, like, whilst your mind might know, your body doesn't know the difference between you running from a war or like a tiger, for instance, versus you running like a half marathon every week. Like if you're doing this excessive training and things, your body doesn't necessarily know the difference between that. So your body's like, well, we're going to retain the resources we have and not put energy into our reproductive system, because like ovulation is a really energy can't think what the word is, but it takes a lot of energy to ovulate. So if you're limiting the resources your body has through kind of aesthetic goals or like other reasons as well, then your body is just going to retain the resources it has to like keep you alive, essentially, versus trying to reproduce.
I really it really resonates with me, because I used to be a model, and it was very widespread between the girls losing their periods for a long time. And I remember, because I lost mine for like a year or so. And then when I told my mom later on, when it came back, she's like, why you didn't tell me? Like, she never heard anything like that before. So it was, scary times. But for us, like, between the girls, like, oh, I don't have my period for so long. And it was just so normal. But because we were really strict with our diet, what we eat, how we looked, and we needed to do that for work. And then we were like, this is just normal. This is just fine. And you're 7, and it's fine. It will be fine. So it's quite sad, I think.
It's really sad. And like, it's so common. Like I used to be a professional dancer, and it was the same in that world as well, where it's like almost celebrated in a kind of sly way that like, oh, if you've not got your period, then like, okay, you're at like a really high level of fitness. And it's like, oh gosh, that's not good. Because ovulation has so many other huge impacts on our body. Like we have sex cell receptors virtually all, like on every cell of our body. So your body is going to be influenced by these hormonal fluctuations, and like estrogen has so much impact on like bone density, for instance. So like you want to make sure that you're having regular ovulation to like prevent risk of osteoporosis later in life and things like that. So it goes so beyond our menstrual cycle, and so often menstrual health or reproductive health, particularly in women, is viewed as something very separate to the rest of our health, which just doesn't make any sense. Like, it's so interlinked, and like I've shared quite openly about my experience of like my mental health and my menstrual health and how they've collided quite drastically at times. And it's just, we are holistic beings and we should be treated that way.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yeah, nutrition, we use like menstruation as a marker for female health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like the fifth vital sign, sometimes we refer to it as.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, have you heard of seed cycling?
Yes.
Yeah. I have come across, I haven't done it personally, but I have talked to people in my course who, you know, either have struggled having menstruation or like even going through menopause or perimenopause, and using seed cycling because some of the seeds are meant to have molecules in them called phytoestrogens that mimic or not mimic estrogen, but also modulate it. So if you have like excess estrogen,
I think the seed cycling is more, my understanding anyway, is more about modulation and like managing the effects of it.
Yeah, so I always think that that's really cool what you can do with plants to influence your cycle, because it just shows how connected we are to the earth. I think it's pumpkin seeds and flax seeds you're supposed to consume in the follicular phase, like a teaspoon a day. And yeah, and then I mean, I eat a ton of seeds anyway, but like not specifically bound to these ones.
I think for the seed cycling, it's like up to 4 tablespoons a day.
Oh, wow.
I think it's quite a lot. So like getting it on like sprinkling it on salads, soups, whatever, like just getting them in across your meals. So it is like quite a lot to get the level of like the modulation. I think it's modulation anyway. But yeah, so pumpkin and flax in the first part of the cycle, ground up, that's going to help to kind of release some of the stuff that's going on to help.
Yeah.
I'm not explaining that well, but if you grind them up, it's better for you from a hormonal perspective. And then in the second half, sesame seeds and sunflower seeds. So what's really a good kind of tip if you are seed cycling is to be tracking when you're ovulating, so you know when you're ovulating. There's a real assumption that ovulation happens on like day 14, for instance, but that's assuming lots of things. So like the 28-day cycle is a bit of a myth anyway. The actual average for a cycle is 29 days, but can vary anything for a healthy cycle between sort of 25 and 35 days. And then ovulation is going to happen roughly 12 to 14 days before your next period. So say if you had a slightly longer cycle, say you had a 34-day cycle, you may not be ovulating until like day 20. So tracking when you're ovulating through basal body temperature, so that's taking your temperature first thing in the morning, and also monitoring your cervical fluid. It's a real sign of health, like checking your fluids. It's like my favorite thing to talk about. I can really go into that if you want me to, but those are kind of 2 key things to help you understand when you're ovulating. And then once you've confirmed ovulation has happened, that's when you switch the seeds up. So just making sure you're getting the right seeds at the right time to support what's going on.
Crazy.
Yeah, I was literally just studying this about how you can track your ovulation through your body temperature and your discharge.
Yeah.
And I knew the temperature thing, but I never knew the discharge thing and how the consistency changes.
Yeah.
And you know you're ovulating when it's more like, what did they describe it? Egg yolk? Not like egg yolk.
White. Egg white. That kind of like stretchy consistency. Like, I think, when I learned about it, it utterly blew my mind, because I don't know about you guys, but like definitely when I was at school, like people would be like, oh, discharge, that's disgusting, like, oh, and like just if ever it came up, it was a thing to be like utterly embarrassed about. And it was just like, oh, like, let's ignore that for the rest of my life. And then you learn about it. And actually, like, it's such a good indicator that your hormones are really happy. If you're not seeing any discharge or like cervical fluid, then that's a real indicator. So that your hormones aren't quite doing what we want them to do. We create cervical fluid in response to rising estrogen levels. So if you're seeing no mucus at all, then that's perhaps an indicator that maybe there's a hormonal imbalance going on. There's a few other reasons why we may not be seeing fluids, but that's kind of one of like the key kind of check-ins. And then we're like, okay, well, like, why aren't we seeing that? What else is going on in the cycle? But for anyone who doesn't know, when we're approaching ovulation and those estrogen levels are rising, we create a different type of cervical fluid. So I teach my clients to check when they wipe after they've been to the toilet, and we just have a look at what's on the paper. So it doesn't involve any internal checking at all. So if you're not comfortable with doing that, it doesn't require that. And when you wipe, I'm sure you'll know what I mean. Some days there's a real like slip and slide sensation where you're like, woo, there is stuff going on down there. And if you have a look, that is something that you are likely to be able to pick up off the paper and stretch between your fingers. And that's a real clear indicator that ovulation is around the corner. It's coming up in the next few days. And then once it's dried up, that means progesterone kicks in. We can only make progesterone if we have ovulated. So once the fluids dry up, it's a really clear indicator. Cool, progesterone's on the scene, ovulation has happened. So that's one way that we can track our cycle in order to know where we're at and what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's very good because I used the method of checking my temperature, and also like, I mean, at the moment I'm pregnant, so I'm like, I have no cycle.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So it's just like, it's funny now, like listening to like, oh yeah, I remember this, but soon I have to go back into it, which I'm like not excited. But you know, it's so much better, because I also find as well that now, especially I think my generation, girls being put on to any pill or any contraception such a young age. So I never been on it. I've been on it once because of my skin was not very nice. So I was like, I want to be on the pill. And then after I changed, like my body changed so much, I was like, I don't want to be on the pill. Yeah. I've been always kind of like, not against it, but it's not really my thing. And in a way, kind of, I'm happier. And then when I found that you can track your cycle, I was like, oh, this much more aligns with what I feel like, or what I believe and want to do. So I think when you're young, this is like, you can just take the pill and then it's easy and it's shoved into early on.
Yeah, I was put on it when I was young too, about like 15 or 16, for acne, along with antibiotics, which I'm sure like did wonders for my health. But yeah, I was on the pill, and like it was crazy, like how much it affected my mental health. And then I took that Depo-Provera shot that you get like you get shot in your butt for 3 months of birth control protection. Oh my god, I've never been that depressed in my life, and I'm like, this is not for me.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
I cannot, not worth it.
It's the links that they're finding between contraception, or like the pill, like oral contraception, and the impact that has on mental health is just like astounding. And it's so frustrating to hear. And then when fertility awareness to be used as a method of birth control gets so much like hate at times, it's just like, oh, but if we educate women on their bodies, then we can use our bodies in order to prevent pregnancy when we want to, and help us plan if you do. And yeah, I mean, the pill is a whole conversation of its own. That it's just, I mean, I'm not against it. I think there's a time and a place for it for certain people, and it's all about informed consent. But I've heard so many horror stories. I mean, I'm gay, so have never had to take the pills. So like, I feel quite like lucky in that respect that I've kind of dodged that. But the amount of clients, and then my friends as well, like naturally this conversation comes up a lot with the work that I do. And it's just like, oh gosh, like if only we were educated on this and given more options versus like, I'll just go on the pill. And it's kind of like no one bats an eyelid. Like, this is the thing that we do. Like, you just go on the pill. And when people start to menstruate, so they have their first period, it can take 3 to 5 years for the period to become regular anyway. And it's like your body has to learn those processes of ovulation and going through these cycles. Like, and it takes a while for the body to settle. So then when really young people are put on the pill, I'm always like, no, like, give your body a chance to like get going. And like the cycle will hopefully, I mean, in some cases, if there are things like PCOS or like other underlying issues, but generally speaking, the cycle will regulate. We just need to give it some time. And that's the thing with the menstrual cycle, whether we're thinking about like starting puberty and it coming on, or even if you're just working on your menstrual cycle, to see those differences. It really is learning the art of patience, because it takes some time to see these things to show up in your cycle. Like from a hormonal perspective, the egg that you ovulate this cycle has been in a process of getting itself ready for the last 3 to 6 months. So it can take 3 to 6 months to see influence on the menstrual cycle. So it does just require some patience when we're cyclical beings to see these changes happen.
I guess we just live in the society that we want everything now. And I guess our parents as well, when they put their children on the pill quite early, and they're like, oh, let's just sort it out, let's just organize here for everyone. But they don't think about like, oh, actually it would need some time for it to...
Well, when you're that young, you don't have any, much autonomy to question a doctor or your parents.
Totally. And like, I was certainly, and again, like, I totally believe time and a place to go and see a doctor, get certain things prescribed. I literally was sharing the other day that I take an antidepressant, and that's like worked wonders for me. So I'm by no means against the medical system. However, I do think we are taught that what the doctor says goes, and it's kind of like, we need to kind of question some of these things sometimes and make sure we're informed about what's going on. And like, again, the information that even GPs in like the UK and stuff have about menstrual cycles, like clients are coming to me and I'm like, that's just not right. And they're just sharing this information where I'm like, the lack of education even within the medical system on menstrual cycles is bonkers.
Yeah. And there's also that element of like shame around it too. You said this before, but you know, when you're young, like you get your period or you get vaginal discharge and you don't want to talk about it. It's like, it's embarrassing in many ways because you're brought up to, you know, think that, like, I want to hide that from people. Yeah, but we're all going through it together anyway. Like,
it's so weird, isn't it? And like how many of us have like hidden a tampon up a sleeve kind of thing, and it's just like that kind of like going to the bathroom or like making sure that your like sanitary pad papers don't like rustle too much, and it's just like, oh, but like we all have this experience, and yet it's so taboo. Like, it's so bizarre. And it's amazing where we see cultures where like it's celebrated, and it's like, oh, it should be. If we're not at a point where it's being celebrated, at least let's normalize it, you know? Like, let's just make it a thing of like, I'm on my period, like, and what?
Yeah,
true. Also, I think with the contraception as well, I just only found like the recent years where you talk more about with your friends, and I think there are different ways of like using contraception, not just the pill. Like, I hear some like contraception, like even when I heard about the bar, I was like, what is the bar? The implant, sorry. Oh, okay. So it's just like, we just know about the contraceptive pill, and actually you have so many other options. You have natural options, you have rings, you can do so many things now, which is, I find crazy that also you can delay your period if you're going on a holiday or if you have a wedding, something coming up, which I think it's mind blowing, and I'm not sure I would want to play so much around it, but it's just being informed, because probably you're going to go in and be like, oh, here's the generic cheapest pill that we can, especially I guess in the UK as well, because they don't want to, because it's free. They're like, oh, just take this. And will it work with your body, your hormone levels? Will it not? There's not many research or not many checks up before, I guess. They just give you one bog standard one.
Yeah, definitely. And like, there's a really great book called, what's it called? Your Brain on Birth Control. I think that's what it's called. And like how like the pill changes everything. That's what's called, by Dr. Sarah E. Hill. And like, that's such a good read because it just totally explains what is going on with like hormonal contraception and like the various impacts that can have on the brain and the body. And then she also explains about the different formulations of different pills. So if anyone listening like is struggling with a certain type of pill, find out what generation of progestin it's made with, and then try a pill that's made with a different generation. Because if you're prescribed one that's like, it's got a different name, but ultimately it's exactly the same type of synthetic hormone that you're using that you're reacting poorly to, you want to make sure you're trying a different type. So again, like even that information, like I had no, and like I say, I mean, I've never had to be on the pill, so it was never something I really looked into. So like learning this, I was like, gosh, like anyone who's ever been on the pill should at least understand, like if this one's not working for you, you need to try like a totally different type of formulation to not get the same side effects that you're currently experiencing if you still want to use that as your method of contraception. But yeah, I'd really recommend that as a resource if anyone wants to understand the various impacts the pill can have on you.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because I had friends who complained, like told me about this because I didn't know about this either, that she used one kind of pill and she was really depressed. So her doctor was saying, oh, I actually tried this because it has different hormones, and then that was working for her. And I was like, but not every doctor is gonna look into it, check it for you. So it's just like, oh, and not all contraception is gonna work for everyone. So
totally, yeah. It's a bit of like, yeah, trial and error, I guess, on the one hand, but yeah, that informed consent is definitely a huge part of any type of healthcare.
Yeah.
I was studying, how estrogen is like excreted from your body by being processed through your liver to detoxify, and then through your feces, and how if it like is in your intestine for a long time, it can be reactivated and reabsorbed into your body. So sometimes if you're on like not even just an estrogen pill, but just naturally too, like you can get into a state of estrogen dominance because of poor liver detoxification, or like simply being like constipated or something like that. And then you can think that you're like low on progesterone, but really you're just high in like reabsorbing estrogen.
Balance of them goes out of whack in that case. So in the second part of the cycle, whilst I'm saying progesterone is the dominant hormone, you do get like a second bump of estrogen in that second half, and you want progesterone to be higher than that bump of estrogen. And if they're kind of a much more, I'm using my hands and realize it's a podcast and no one can see them, but if they're kind of like if you're imagining like an arc and they were mirroring each other and there wasn't a gap in between, then that's where we're kind of seeing the estrogen dominance, where they're more in line with each other versus progesterone being the dominant hormone. So yeah, you really want to make sure that like going to the toilet every day is such an important thing. I'm always talking about this to my clients, and it makes such a difference in being able to go. And so thinking about like what's going on in your diet, like simple stuff, are you hydrated well enough? Also, I know if you have any kind of like trauma can sometimes be a thing that's related to this, of like literally not being able to let go, and then not being able to go to the toilet, and seeing chronic constipation in clients. So yeah, diet's a really big part of that. And then I see a lot, reflexology is really good for getting people to go to the toilet, which is one of those things that people don't necessarily expect. I've told the story so many times that she doesn't mind, but part of the reason I ended up in this work is my girlfriend has endometriosis. When I was learning to be a reflexologist, she was a very convenient pair of feet to practice on. So we were kind of seeing that this was really helping her, and she really struggled a lot with bowel symptoms. Like her, she had endometriosis all over her bowels and like really struggled with her digestion and things. And with reflexology, it meant she could reduce some of the, like, she was taking like a surgical laxative every single day, like what they would give you before you have surgery to empty your bowels, and she was taking that daily, and it's like, that is definitely not medication you should be taking daily. And between some other things that she's done, but then also like the reflexology really helps her to go to the toilet, which is just like, it's amazing that someone rubbing your feet can help you go to the toilet. It just seems so bonkers. But then again, we see that kind of nervous system regulation coming in. If we're in a fight or flight state, your body is going to be in like ready to run or ready to like fight or flight, you know what I'm saying? And whereas when we're in that rest and digest phase, the blood is no longer in our limbs ready to run. It's able to go to our vital organs, and then digestion can take place in a much more efficient way. So if you're in a chronic state of stress and anxiety, like your digestion is going to be impacted, which in turn can have a knock-on effect on your hormones, and then you can get into this kind of like vicious circle with it. So it's a really big part of the work that I think people need to be educated on, because it's just kind of like, again, who really wants to talk about their toilet habits? But it is a really essential part of your hormonal health.
Yeah, that's like step one when like nutritionally we're dealing with people with hormone imbalances. Like you can do the most wonderful like nutrition plans, supplements, like you can even do genetic testing to see if you have like you're predisposed to not be able to clear hormones from your body as efficiently as the general population. There can be genetic SNPs, they're called, on specific specific genes. But like you can, even if you're what we call a poor detoxifier, like genetically, if you're not excreting it from your body physically, like then you can give yourself everything in the world, but it's not going to work unless your digestive tract is moving every day. And like, taking laxatives every day is not great, because it makes a lazy bowel where your body stops creating the signals, peristalsis, and things like that to clear your colon.
Yeah, it's so essential. And yeah, like I think with so much of this work, like you say, like you can do all the testing, you can do all the supplements, but so often it's about bringing it back to the real basic stuff. Like, are you sleeping well? Are you going to the toilet regularly? Like, are you chronically stressed? And it's all the things that are so easy to, often it's the stuff we already know. So it's really easy to overlook it. And it's like, no, this is why we call it the foundational factors. You can't build on top of it if they're not in a good place. So yeah, that's often a big part of my work. And I'm sure you see it in yours as well, where it's like, let's bring it right back and start at the beginning.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about reflexology?
Yeah, so reflexology, it's a holistic therapy. It's all, well, I give treatments on the feet. You can also do it on the hands, the face and the ears. But we believe different parts of the body are mapped out in the feet with like different areas we call a reflex, and they correspond to these different parts of the body. So by working into them, we can have an impact throughout the whole body. So it's kind of a similar principle to acupuncture in terms of we're working so with reflexology, we're applying pressure to certain parts of the body. With acupuncture, they're applying the needles, and it has impacts elsewhere. So it's a really deeply relaxing therapy. It is so much more than just a foot rub. When I first heard about it, I was like, give it the biggest eye roll. And I was like, that sounds like the biggest pile of rubbish I've ever heard of. Like, how on earth can that possibly work? And I went when I was quite young to help manage anxiety. Like my poor mum didn't know what else to do, and she'd been seeing a reflexologist. She was like, just try it, see how you feel. And I was like, yeah, okay. Like, it just sounds like a pile of rubbish. And went along, and whenever I see clients now, they mostly just fall asleep. They lay back and do the treatment, they fall asleep. I was sat bolt upright watching everything she did, and I was like, what's that? What are you doing? Like, I don't understand. And she could just tell all sorts through my feet. So when I'm working with clients now, you can feel under the skin, it's almost like there's bubble wrap or like a knot that you get in your back in the foot. There's kind of like a real in terms of sensation, sometimes the reflexes will feel much more full, or they'll feel quite depleted. You can also, if you want to get into the woo, then like you can definitely feel on a bit of an energetic perspective what's happening. And I just came out and was like, oh, I don't know what just happened. And it helped me so much to bring that anxiety like down a notch or two. And it's something I was always quite curious about, and then eventually decided to train in. And then it turns out, there's this whole area of like women's health and reproductive health that we can support through reflexology. So all the reproductive reflexes are in the heels. So we do a lot of work around there to either support ovulation, to support the luteal phase. I work quite a lot in terms of reflexology anyway with clients going through IVF. So supporting the various protocols that they're on, and then also like in the 2-week wait, again, just to help manage that anxiety and things. And it's really interesting when people are going through IVF, often their feet will feel so much hotter and be almost like buzzing through, because they're taking so many stimulating medications, like you can literally feel that in their feet. And it sounds so bizarre, but it's a very distinctive feeling where it's like, oh, okay, there's like definitely different things going on here. And you can never like diagnose through reflexology. The reflexes, relatively speaking, are very generalized. So there's like the stomach reflex, the liver reflex, the ovary reflex. So you get an idea that there's something going on in that area. I could never be like, you have this very specific liver thing going on. So but you get kind of like a look into the body and what's going on there, and it's really surprising what you can pick up on. I quite like it sometimes when I see people come in and they're a little bit skeptical and they don't quite tell me everything, and then at the end of the session I'm like, oh, so this came up on your spine reflex. And I had one guy who's like, I broke my spine there like 10 years ago. And I was like, yeah, you can feel it in your feet. And it's just it's amazing. It's such I love it as a therapy. I think I love it because it's non-invasive. It is literally just the ankles down. So often seeing people, if they have any kind of like sexual trauma, if they're dealing with reproductive issues, then having hands-on like abdominal therapies may not be something they want to go through. Whereas with reflexology, like I'm literally touching your ankles down. So it's very non-invasive in that respect. It's deeply, deeply relaxing. Like I have clients that you see them coming in and they're almost like vibrating with anxiety, and they come out like a different person. And I think that alone is invaluable. And I just think it's magical. And it sounds so weird, but I love it.
No, it makes sense. I've never been to reflexology, and it does sound good. So
you should. It's so good in pregnancy, and like from 37 weeks, you can start to do preparation for birth treatments to help kind of get the baby moving. And like they're some of my favorite treatments to give, because you see such a direct response to what you're doing. You'll be doing the rest of the treatment and you get onto the uterus reflex, and then the bump just starts like moving around and kicking. Like it's so amazing. And it's nice. It's like nice selfishly as a reflexologist to be like, it's working. Because obviously, like, you just, generally speaking, people fall asleep and they're like, oh, that was amazing. But it's really cool when you're like, you literally see the body responding to what you're doing.
No, I think it's wonderful, because I think as a yoga teacher, then when someone comes out of class and they have some emotional release, or they like have a epiphany during class, they're like, oh my God, then you're just so happy. And people like feeling so embarrassed. Like I was crying after like in Shavasana. I was like, I mean, that's good. Let it out. Never let it all out. So I can imagine that you're feeling very happy if you see this in reflexology.
Yeah, nice. It's great. I love it. It's so interesting, and like it's I think it's not got the same kind of like reputation as acupuncture has, but it's like it can be as effective. I mean, there's not as the amount of research into reflexology as there is acupuncture, which I wish there was, because I love the science too. But again, like working with the IVF clients, say the amount, so I got brought in to work in an acupuncture clinic for the IVF clients, because the amount of clients that they were seeing that are going through IVF, there's already all the injections that they have to do, but they hate needles, but they've heard acupuncture's good for supporting IVF, and they're like on the table, like tense as anything and not relaxing at all. So then I got brought in specifically to treat those clients, to give them some support through IVF that didn't involve any more needles.
Nice, yeah. I didn't know you can support it, so it's wonderful.
Yeah.
You're going to try it, Melinda?
Well, now I'm like, oh, I might. Because also I was like, I'm 32 weeks, and I'm like, oh, because my sister gave birth on 37 weeks, and I'm like, oh, lucky, because I'm getting bigger and bigger, and I'm not sure I want to go to 40, 41 weeks.
Yeah, I see a lot of people at 40, 41 weeks that are like, please help.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast, and they were telling about all the things that people try to get the labor started, and some things like, you should not try that, but you should try this, and then reflexology and acupuncture as well to change the bridge baby, see if they can turn around.
Yeah, acupuncture is also really good for helping babies get moving. They work really nicely in conjunction with each other.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's so many things, we can talk about all these holistic and different approaches to help the body, and I think that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you would like to share with us, or anything you want to add or ask Ashley?
I mean, how do you both, Melinda, you're obviously pregnant, but like previously or like currently, like how do you relate to your cycles? Like how do you feel? Like what's your kind of general feeling towards your cycles?
I think I went through phases because as I said, during modeling, I lost my cycle. And then when I got it back, I was like, oh, quite happy for it. And then that's why I never taken any pill or contraceptive pill. And then I used like checking my temperature for years and years. And then I was like, why not try the implant? Because so many people were like, oh, it's just so much easier. And then because I have such a weird schedule, I'm waking up different times, and it usually be time to measure your temperature. And I was like, I'll try the implant. And I remember I had it for a year just before pregnancy. And I lost my period again. And I was like, oh, I don't like not having my period. It doesn't feel right. Also, my mood was very bad. Lots of times I was very low. My libido went down very low as well. So I was just like, I think this is very good for me. So I came off from it. And then we knew we wanted to have a baby. So we wanted to make sure I have at least 6 to 8 months of clearance before.
Amazing. Glad to hear that. It's so nice to hear that.
Because I think it was like, I was like, I'm feeling bad that it should be staying there for 3 years, but I want to take it out after like 5 months, 6 months. I was like, I'm going to give it one more go. So like, I stayed until like probably a year, but I was like, I really want it out now. I was like, I'm sorry for wasting your implant, but I just don't like it. I prefer the more natural approaches. I'm also very bad at taking pills every day. Like,
Me too.
Yeah. It's enough to take the vitamins now as pregnant. It's like, you have to take the vitamins. I remember that.
Yeah, I'm the same. I have to have like an old lady pill box to remind me of what to take each day. Otherwise, it does not happen.
Yeah, for me, I came from a science background where I studied anatomy. I studied menstrual cycles, pregnancy, birth, about the body. And I was so disconnected from my own body and paying attention to my emotions and stuff. And I never learned any of that until I started practicing yoga and meditation and working with more subtle energies and really understanding your body, and then feeling how you move through your cycles and trying to honor how my energy levels were within that. And then it's just been interesting because you can't just have all this knowledge and not put it into practice and understand it without living it. So yoga, being a yoga teacher and working with energies more and breath and having that relate back to the science makes it make so much more sense.
Definitely. I think bringing in like all the different practices and different things, and like you say, like you kind of have to live it to really experience it and feel it and like to truly understand it. I think it's a really big part of it is like embodying it.
Yeah, our hormones are so powerful. Like we don't have much willpower over them. You just have to accept where you are and be like, okay, I'm in this phase, I feel good, or I'm in this phase, I feel really down, and maybe I'll just stay home and let myself feel that instead of trying to ignore that it's happening and do something that goes against like needing to be home and rest.
Yeah, 100%. Like we were saying, that honouring of what's going on and not always pushing against.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's good to kind of be aware of it or tracking it, because then you're not fighting it. Because I am definitely the one that always felt like I really need to work, why I can't work, and I beat myself up for it. And so I think that's the biggest learning curve for me. Like, okay, it's actually okay to be taking it easy today, or just like not knowing how to adjust to it, I guess. And in a way, like, that's why it's weird to be pregnant, because you have just very different waves, and then like, so what should I do now? And I think just like the hormonal cycles, pregnancy cycles, and the trimesters, we know so little about it. So every time something happens, I have to Google it up. And then Google, you see lots of misinformation, not very clear. So it's just like, it's bad how badly educated we are about cycles, pregnancy. I think all my friends, because I'm the first one in the friendship group who's pregnant, they're like asking all the questions. They're like, what? Oh, what? I never heard about that. I was like, me neither. It just happened to me. So I wish we would have a little bit better understanding and better teaching about it. Or at least we would try to educate younger generations.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's just, we should just have an understanding of what's going on in our body. I think if you ask most kids to like label like a male reproductive system, they'd probably do a lot better job than if they were given a female one, you know? Like, it's just like, why? We just should know this. I think it is just essential. And even if it's just a case of like understanding what's normal and what's not, and to avoid that embarrassment of like, oh, your period, oh, discharge, like, just that information alone, I think, could be so powerful. Like, even if we just start there and then build upwards, because I mean, I'd love to be teaching fertility awareness in schools, but I don't quite know if the system is ready for that.
Yeah, I think our we were just talking with my partner how in school they just showed us horrible pictures of sexually transmitted diseases, and that was like all the fertility awareness. It's like, okay, so I've just seen some awful pictures and nothing really about my cycle or what's happening or what should we be expecting. Just it's scaremongering, or like making you feel scared.
Yeah, 100%. Like our sex education, we did get taught about periods, but I really don't remember it. But what I do remember was they brought in loads of different contraception options, so like condoms and diaphragms and things, but they hole punched everything so no one could steal it. And I was like, isn't that really counterintuitive? Like, wouldn't you rather the kids were stealing the contraception than not? I don't know. It's just like, this is stupid. But
it's anyway. more like be afraid of your body instead of learning about it and understanding.
Yeah, and being empowered by it.
Yeah.
Not make all these things taboo, because as you say, period or like going to the toilet is all taboo topics, and you're just afraid to ask it. Sometimes you're afraid even to ask your doctor, you know. So it's interesting, and like even I'm like going to my midwife and just asking some simple questions. Sometimes like, oh, should I be like, no, I should ask this question because she's a professional, she understands. So it's just like shredding through my being ashamed or being scared. It's like, okay, yeah, I can ask these questions.
Yeah, I always say to my clients, there's no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing as too much information. I literally have clients sending me pictures of their cervical fluid to help them understand what is going on. And I'm like, there is like, if you're fine with it, I'm fine with it. Like, let's get educated on it.
Yeah, amazing.
Very cool. Thank you for coming to talk to us, Katy.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really lovely to speak to you both.
Yeah. Is there anything that you have coming up that you want to share, or share your information on how people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I'm very active on Instagram. So it's Reflex East. I'm based in Hackney in East London. I'm not actually taking on any reflexology clients at the moment, but I am going to be taking on some one-to-one fertility awareness clients. So that is the tracking your cycle and using your cycle as a diagnostic tool and a vital sign to give you the support to get those period problems sorted, essentially, is like one of the big things that I'm like working with clients on at the moment. But otherwise, I have loads of free stuff on my website. So I've got my own podcast that I co-host with Hannah Pern, and like an introduction to fertility awareness, like a PMS workshop, a temperature tracking workshop as well. And like they're either free or like super cheap, because I just want people to get this info. So you can check all that out as well.
Yeah, wonderful. We will put this all in the show notes as well, so they can find you. And thank you very much.
Thank you.